In the dawning silence of an ancient world where empires stretched their borders like shadows across mountain, desert, and sea, the Silk Road emerged not merely as a road of silk but as a pulsating network of human ambition, weaving its unseen influence across continents, and yet deep beneath the shining facade of well-known caravan tracks lay a darker, more intricate geography, one forged by necessity, secrecy, and the relentless will of traders who sought to survive beyond the suffocating grip of imperial power. For while kings boasted of controlling the arteries of commerce, it was in truth the hidden capillaries, narrow, dangerous, unmapped routes winding through silent gorges and forgotten valleys that carried the lifeblood of exotic goods across Asia. And as the narrator's voice rises like an echo through time, he reveals that the popular image of a single Silk Road is a myth crafted by simplicity, for reality was a sprawling, ever-changing spiderweb of paths, branching and twisting according to the shifting tides of war, taxation, climate, and opportunity, a living system that adapted to every barrier placed before it, and some faint scholarly voices murmur that merchants were often forced to abandon the grand roads of Samarkand, Kashgar, or Merv whenever tolls grew too heavy or imperial patrols too suspicious, driving them into the perilous embrace of little-known passes where snowstorms devoured caravans whole and where the only law was survival. And in those shadowed landscapes, lit only by the flickering glow of torches and the silver wash of moonlight on stone, traders devised ingenious methods to conceal their cargo, wrapping rare minerals inside mundane bundles of wool, hiding precious dyes within hollowed camel saddles, or burying emergency caches under cairns marked only by cryptic symbols understood by a select few, while the mountains themselves seemed to whisper warnings carried on the freezing wind, telling of routes so narrow that caravans were forced to walk single file along ledges that crumbled beneath their feet, and deserts whose shifting dunes swallowed entire trails overnight, leaving travelers to navigate by stars and fading memories alone. Yet despite such dangers, goods of unimaginable value continued to flow through these hidden arteries. From remote mines in the Hindu Kush came minerals sparkling like frozen sunlight, from secret gardens tucked within river oases came spices whose aroma held the power to seduce kings. From forgotten highland groves came resins that physicians guarded like sacred relics, and faint analytical voices note that such obscure commodities shaped distant cultures in ways history barely recorded, seeping into rituals, medicines, and technologies far from their points of origin. And as caravans trudged across hostile terrain, leaving behind only scattered artifacts, broken ceramics, rusted buckles, traces of charcoal and abandoned fire pits, they unintentionally seeded the archaeological mysteries that modern scholars still struggle to decipher. For somewhere beneath layers of sand and sediment may lie entire trade outposts erased from maps, hordes of goods abandoned mid-journey, or stone inscriptions carved by weary travelers seeking solace in immortalizing a moment of their perilous journey. And as we gaze deeper into this hidden world, the narrator insists that these clandestine routes were not peripheral but essential, the true veins of the Silk Road's economic heart, and their existence challenges every simplistic narrative we have inherited about ancient trade, urging us to look beyond the monumental cities and toward the silent, deadly wilderness that shaped humanity's earliest global connections. And as our journey presses deeper into the labyrinth of the Silk Road's forgotten arteries, the narrator unveils the second great truth concealed beneath centuries of myth, that the hidden routes were born not merely of geography but of defiance. For empires, swollen with pride and hungry for gold, erected toll stations like iron gates across the main arteries, squeezing merchants until their profits bled into imperial coffers. And whenever rulers in Chang'an or Ctesiphon or the shadowed courts of the Kushan realm increased their levies, the merchants responded not with rebellion but with ingenuity, diverting their caravans into the wilderness, crafting new paths through landscapes so unforgiving that empires dared not follow. Whispers of scholarly analysis float in like wind across stone, reminding us that many of these shadow paths were mapped not on parchment but in memory, passed between generations of traders in code-like descriptions. Follow the river until the raven-shaped rock, then turn toward the wind-carved ridge, and that these secret geographies often shifted with each season, forcing travelers to develop an intimate understanding of mountain moods, desert patterns, and the subtle signs of danger that no imperial official could ever master. And so, bypassing the watchful eyes of tax collectors, caravans crept through treacherous mountain passes such as the Wakhan Corridor, where ice storms could bury an entire caravan within minutes, or slipped into the burning silence of the Lop Desert, where dunes shifted like serpents and pale mirages lured the desperate toward invisible death, and yet the narrating voice makes clear that these merchants were not reckless adventurers but calculated strategists, weighing their risks with the precision of generals, carrying water pouches sealed with wax, leading camels trained to walk silently at night, and marking hidden rest points with piles of stones arranged in coded patterns. Quiet expert-like murmurs suggest that even ancient bandits respected these shadow routes, for the danger was too great for predictable ambushes, and so traders devised clever decoys sending one small caravan with visible goods as bait, while the true cargo followed miles behind, disguised as simple travelers or dispersed into smaller groups whose movements vanished among the gullies and valleys, and beyond human threats lay the brutal, indifferent forces of nature, winds that could strip flesh, rivers swollen with snow melt that tore away entire camps in the dark, and cliffs etched with the skeletal remains of pack animals that had fallen in generations past. Yet despite all these obstacles, the hidden routes flourished, for necessity is the mother of invention, and traders learned to treat the landscape as an ally rather than an enemy, using its dangers to shield themselves from imperial control. In the moonlit stillness of high passes, where only the crunch of frost beneath hooves echoed across stone, one can imagine the determination etched into the faces of those who dared to guide their caravans away from the known and into the uncharted, carrying goods so precious that even a single crate could feed a village for a year. And as the narrator's voice deepens, he reveals that these routes were more than tactical detours, they were acts of quiet rebellion, demonstrations of the human spirit's refusal to be constrained by borders, laws, or the greed of rulers who believed they owned the land beneath every footstep. And in this dangerous dance between empire and merchant, the Silk Road's hidden network expanded like veins beneath the skin of a giant, forming a parallel economy invisible to bureaucrats but essential to the survival of distant communities who relied on the flow of rare minerals, spices, dyes, and medicinal treasures that never passed through official markets. Thus, the smuggler's almanac, an oral tradition of secret knowledge, became the true map of the Silk Road's beating heart, a testament to the relentless will of humanity to carve pathways of opportunity even through the harshest terrain, outwitting empires not through force but through silence, secrecy, and the unbroken courage of those who walked the forgotten paths. And as the Silk Road's hidden arteries continued to pulse beneath the gaze of oblivious empires, the narrator guides us deeper into the very soul of those shadowed networks, where the true essence of ancient trade flickered like distant torchlight against the walls of time. For beyond the caravans laden with silk that dominate our popular imagination, there existed a world of exotic cargo so rare, so influential, and so fiercely guarded that its journey across the wilderness shaped civilizations in ways both subtle and profound. And it is here, in this secretive realm of rare minerals, forgotten spices, lost dyes, and mysterious medicinal substances, that the hidden routes revealed their greatest purpose. For the goods that traveled these clandestine paths were not merely valuable, they were transformative. Faint analytical murmurs drift into the background like the rustling of parchment, suggesting that minerals mined from isolated peaks, glittering shards of lapis from the quarries of Badakhshan, iridescent specular hematite from remote Iranian mountains, or translucent fluorite coveted by alchemists moved in whisper-quiet caravans where each fragment could alter the economy of a distant court. And these minerals, wrapped in wool and sealed in wax, were carried through secret valleys where the sun barely touched the stones, guarded by traders who understood that even the mention of their presence could attract bandits or imperial inspectors hungry for confiscation. And alongside these minerals flowed dyes of astonishing rarity, deep crimson pigments extracted drop by drop from insects that lived only on the sparse shrubs of specific deserts, blues squeezed painstakingly from elusive flowers, and purples brewed in tiny quantities from mollusks gathered along forgotten riverbeds. And though they traveled in quantities so small they could fit into the palm of a hand, these dyes carried the power to change fashion trends in capital cities, to mark social status, to define the garments of royalty, and to elevate rituals with colors almost supernatural in their intensity. And then there were the spices, the most enigmatic passengers of all, scattered across mountains and oases where only the hardiest plants survived, fiery resins that healed wounds, seeds with intoxicating aromas, barks that preserved meat for months, powders believed to ward off evil, and roots whose bitterness masked poisons or cured fevers, spices that left behind no written record, whose names vanished from history, yet whose presence can still be felt in the subtle flavor traditions of isolated communities across Asia, faintly echoing the ancient exchanges that once pulsed through the hidden roads. Some quiet expert-like voices hint that these exotic goods shaped local cultures far more than silk ever did, for their medicinal value altered healing practices, their colors transformed art and worship, their scents changed the rituals of royalty, and their minerals influenced weapon-making, jewelry, and even early scientific experimentation, creating ripple effects that traveled farther than the caravans themselves. And to imagine the logistics of their movement is to step into the raw heart of human endurance, for picture the caravans trudging across frozen ridges at dawn, each camel carrying small bundles whose worth exceeded that of gold, the traders moving silently, constantly tasting the air for signs of danger, watching the patterns of clouds curling around mountain peaks as if nature itself communicated warnings through subtle codes. Imagine the desert crossings where men shielded their precious cargo beneath layers of coarse textiles, burying the most valuable goods in sudden sandstorms only to return with stars as their guides, retrieving them through instinct and memory. Envision the narrow canyons where a single landslide could wipe out months of preparation, leaving rare resins, dyes, and minerals scattered across the cliffside to be swallowed by erosion, lost forever until an archaeologist thousands of years later discovers a fragment and wonders which forgotten caravan left it behind. And through all this, the narrator reminds us that the unseen flow of these extraordinary goods left behind almost no written documentation, not because they were insignificant, but because they were too valuable, too secret, too easily taxed or stolen, and so they passed through history like shadows, their impact preserved not in scrolls or inscriptions but in the silent evolution of cultures that absorbed them without ever knowing their origin. And as the screen fades into sweeping aerial shots of mountains, deserts, and lost valleys, the invisible threads of this ancient commerce become visible once more, reminding us that what we call the Silk Road was never just a highway of silk, it was a living stream of rare wonders, quietly coursing through the veins of the world, shaping humanity with every hidden step. And as the unseen streams of rare minerals, forgotten spices, sacred resins, and vanishing dyes flowed through those secret arteries of the Silk Road, the narrator now turns our gaze toward what remained behind, silent testaments to a world that moved in shadows, fragments of human courage and ingenuity buried beneath centuries of dust. And here, in the heart of desolate valleys and wind-carved plateaus, the landscape becomes a vast tomb of stories waiting to be unearthed, for every hidden root that once pulsed with life eventually left behind relics of its passing, tiny footnotes of history scattered across mountainsides like whispers frozen in time. Faint expert-like voices drift through the silence, suggesting that archaeologists have barely scratched the surface of these forgotten pathways, that beyond the well-excavated hubs of Samarkand, Dunhuang, Turfan, or Taxila lies a whole unseen world of collapsed caravanserais built not by kings but by secretive traders seeking refuge in the wilderness, crude stone shelters perched near springs that dried centuries ago, shallow caves blackened by ancient fires where caravans once waited for storms to pass, and unexpected clusters of pottery fragments whose shapes do not match any known style, hinting at micro-communities that existed only long enough to serve a passing flow of clandestine commerce. And as the narrator's voice deepens, he reveals the tantalizing possibility that somewhere beneath shifting dunes or hidden behind landslides lie the treasure hoards abandoned in haste, bundles of rare minerals left behind when caravans fled raiders, jars sealed with forgotten spices dumped during storms to lighten the load, chests of foreign coins hidden beneath rocks when traders feared discovery by imperial patrols, or even ceremonial objects meant as gifts for distant courts that never reached their destination, their ornate surfaces now corroded by centuries of silence. Some quiet scholarly murmurs hint that entire lost settlements may yet sleep beneath the soil trade stations that thrived for a generation and then vanished, their inhabitants moving on as routes shifted, leaving behind only invisible footprints that modern satellites struggle to detect, linguistic anomalies in remote villages, odd accents, unexpected loanwords, and ritual practices that resemble customs from distant lands offer clues that wandering merchants once passed through, leaving behind intangible treasures, stories, beliefs, fragments of languages carried in memory rather than script. And into this tapestry of disappearance emerges the haunting question of how many artifacts still lie undiscovered, how many silk fragments preserved in dry caves, how many sealed jars of ancient dyes buried beneath collapsed roofs, How many carved stones marking long-lost caravan routes remain waiting for the touch of daylight after 1,000 years of darkness, and as the mist of antiquity begins to thin, the narrator turns our vision toward a startling revelation that the hidden arteries of the Silk Road, those secretive paths carved by necessity and shaped by the quiet brilliance of forgotten merchants, did not vanish with the fall of empires but instead echo through the veins of our modern world, for in every shadow market, every informal supply chain, every unregistered crossing of goods across borders, we can still trace the ghostly outline of ancient strategies perfected thousands of years ago, and faint analytical whispers remind us that human beings, no matter the era, have always sought ways to navigate around authority, around taxation, around the grasping hands of power, creating parallel economies that thrive precisely because they operate beyond the reach of official maps, and across the deserts of modern Central Asia, in the bustling back alleys of frontier towns, in the unmarked paths trodden by shepherds whose ancestors once guided caravans through forbidden mountain passes. The legacy of those hidden routes lives on, not as relics but as living systems of survival, for today's informal traders mirror the ingenuity of their ancient counterparts moving goods at night to avoid checkpoints, disguising valuable commodities within everyday items, forming networks of trust built not on contracts but on whispered agreements, handshakes, and the fragile honor of necessity, and as the narrator's voice deepens, he draws an unbroken line from the past to the present, revealing how modern smuggling routes across borders in Central Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and South America echo the secret corridors of the Silk Road not because of criminal intent alone, but because of the same ancient instincts, the need to survive, to provide, to outwit systems designed to control mobility and wealth, for whether it was a desert pass in the 2nd century or a remote border trail in the 21st, the logic remains identical where there is opportunity and restriction, there will always be hidden routes carved through the landscape like veins of quiet resistance. Faint voices of modern economists drift in, noting that vast informal markets selling everything from rare herbs to minerals, electronics to textiles operate using principles nearly identical to those that guided ancient caravans along shadow paths, relying on adaptability, secrecy, and the ability to move quickly when authorities tighten their grip, and the narrator emphasizes that these modern networks, like their ancient predecessors, are neither wholly noble nor entirely villainous. They exist in the gray space between survival and law, between ingenuity and risk, shaped by the pressures of their time just as the Silk Road's hidden arteries were shaped by imperial tolls, raids, and geography, and as the camera sweeps across modern trade hubs, shipping lanes, truck convoys winding through mountainous highways, and satellite imagery revealing faint trails still used by local populations, a striking truth emerges, that ancient innovation was not merely a stepping stone but a blueprint, an eternal reminder that humanity's relationship with trade is fluid, adaptive, and relentlessly resourceful, and scholars quietly note that the same resilience which pushed merchants into the perilous passes of the Pamirs or the burning silence of the Taklamakan is mirrored today in those who risk everything to transport goods through conflict zones, economic blockades, or regions forgotten by global infrastructure, and the narrator, with the gravity of a final revelation, declares that the story of the Silk Road's hidden routes is ultimately a story about the human spirit, its refusal to be trapped, its instinct to carve paths through adversity, its ability to innovate in the margins where survival depends on creativity more than compliance, and that these forgotten arteries remind us that history is not just shaped by empires and armies, but by countless anonymous individuals whose footsteps carved the world's first global networks, and thus, as modern parallels illuminate the ancient wisdom of movement, exchange, and clandestine resilience, the hidden Silk Roads live on not as dusty relics in museums, but as living symbols of humanity's unbroken dance between opportunity and obstruction, a testament to our enduring ability to find a way forward even when the official roads are closed. And now, as the sun sets across the endless expanses that once bore the weight of untold caravans, the narrator casts his gaze across the converging shadows of past and present, revealing the final, haunting truth of the Silk Road's hidden arteries, that these secret pathways, once etched into the bones of mountains, deserts, and rivers by the tireless determination of traders and merchants, still breathe quietly beneath the surface of history, guarding mysteries that defy maps, challenging scholars to look beyond the well-worn paths of empires. For every abandoned mineral cache, every lost spice jar, Every stone shelter atop a forgotten ridge tells a story of ingenuity, risk, and resilience, and faint expert-like voices remind us that each fragment of evidence, whether a shard of pottery, a cryptic inscription, a linguistic echo in a remote village, or a solitary tool buried under millennia of sediment, offers a whisper of the complex human networks that carried the lifeblood of civilization along shadowed corridors hidden from the eyes of kings, emperors, and bureaucrats alike. And as the narrator's voice deepens with cinematic weight, he invites the viewer to imagine the endless potential lying beneath dunes and snowfields, behind cliffs and along riverbeds, a tapestry of forgotten settlements, trading posts, and routes that could, if uncovered, forever alter our understanding of ancient commerce and culture, hinting at civilizations shaped not by the grandeur of capital cities but by the subtle, unrecorded movements of traders navigating danger, secrecy, and the unforgiving forces of nature. And in this meditation on history's unseen currents, the modern world emerges as a mirror, for the same spirit that compelled traders to traverse perilous mountain passes and shifting desert sands now drives individuals, communities, and nations to navigate invisible economies, clandestine routes, and informal networks that sustain life, commerce, and culture far from official oversight, a continuum stretching from the lapis mines of Badakhshan to the back alleys of today's trade hubs, each echoing the silent pulse of human ingenuity across centuries. And as sweeping aerial shots trace the contours of jagged mountains, barren deserts, and forgotten valleys, the narrator emphasizes that the Silk Road was never a singular, static highway but a living, breathing organism of human endeavor, adapting, shifting, and persisting through the rise and fall of empires, through famine, war, and natural catastrophe, leaving behind both tangible relics and intangible legacies, subtle cultural imprints, and linguistic traces that continue to resonate in isolated communities. And yet, perhaps the most profound truth revealed in this exploration is that the hidden Silk Roads are not merely historical phenomena, but enduring lessons in resilience, creativity, and adaptation, showing that when faced with obstacles imposed by authority, environment, or circumstance, humanity invariably finds pathways to thrive, and that the greatest discoveries may lie not in grand monuments or documented archives but in the silent shadows of forgotten trails, beneath the sands of deserts, inside collapsed shelters, or etched in the memory of isolated peoples whose ancestors once carried exotic cargo through perilous lands, leaving behind fragments of civilizations that flourished quietly, invisibly, yet indispensably. And as the narrator's voice rises to a final crescendo, he issues a challenge to the modern viewer, to look beyond the accepted narratives, to question the completeness of history, to seek the untold stories, to imagine the undiscovered treasures hidden beneath the surface of our world, and to recognize that the Silk Road's secret arteries, once invisible, now slowly illuminated through archaeology, scholarship, and imagination, continue to inspire wonder, curiosity, and a profound respect for the ingenuity, courage, and resilience of the countless individuals whose footsteps, though erased from maps, remain indelibly inscribed upon the story of humanity itself, concluding the epic journey of discovery with a reminder that the past is never truly gone, only waiting for those willing to traverse the hidden paths, uncover the silent treasures, and bring to light the untold histories that have shaped the world in ways still resonant today.